She says later that they were fighting all the way home from a swimming lesson. And when they pulled into their driveway, which was right next to the church, her husband Brent was leading a funeral procession. And she threatens them saying, "You will not say a word until that coffin enters that church or there will be big trouble." Welcome to Book Therapy. I'm your host, Kim Patton. There's no way to count how many books are floating around in this world. Some are decent, some are truly terrible, and some are great. Today we're going to take a deep dive into one great book. Together we will discover gems of truth and encouragement to help you face your current season of life. I'm ready, you're ready, let's get this party started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Book Therapy. We are kicking off season 3 today. We've been doing this since the summer of 2022. So welcome back to the show. I have a great book for you coming up next, as always. This is going to be an introductory book because next time you get to meet the author. So let's get on with the show. Let's dive into the book. Today we are talking about The Minister's Wife by Karen Stiller, a memoir of faith, doubt, friendship, loneliness, forgiveness, and more. This was published in 2020, and I read it shortly after it was published because I had heard the author on a podcast, and I was going through a breakup with our church. It was difficult because I loved our church and I loved the people in our church, but there were some disagreements that led to us leaving in July of 2020. And it came as a complete shock to me. I was not really on board with the decision, but I did understand why Kevin was making the decision to step away. It just took me a little while to kind of unravel what had happened and why. And Karen was very sweet. I reached out to her in a message, and she replied with such tenderness toward another pastor's wife. And I needed at that point, I was starving for the perspective of, hey, we are leaving our church and I'm so confused and I'm so hurt, and help me through this. And I don't mind reaching out to complete strangers. I do it fairly often. But Karen wrote back as if we were friends already, and she was so kind, and I never forgot that. And so over time, we actually became friends more on the basis of fellow writers than ministry and, pastor wifing, because we had stepped away. And so I wasn't a pastor's wife anymore. But we talked a lot about writing, and I reached out to her several times for advice, and she was always funny. And I read her book, and it was funny, and it was warm, and it was just precious. It was exactly what I needed, and the exact type of book I love to read. I love the stories that she tells. She's witty and kind of she's not really sarcastic, but she has a little bit of a dry sense of humor, and it works. Her writing is flawless, but also just the tone behind her writing is really, really fun. So I enjoyed this book. I've talked about it before. You may have heard me talk about it before. And I actually interviewed her about her next book. And so that's going to be the next episode. You guys get to meet Karen Stiller. She's a wonderful, wonderful human, and I can't wait for you to meet her. But today we're going to talk about The Minister's Wife. And she talks in this book about faith and doubt, friendship and loneliness, forgiveness, and more. So I just took apart the subtitle to kind of give us a basis of what we're going to talk about today. First, with faith and doubt, those kind of come hand in hand. When you live a life of faith, you often have moments of doubt. Karen and her husband, Brent, raised their 3 kids in the church. He was a pastor, minister in many churches. I love how Karen talks about involving her kids in this church life. She says on page 88, "In Sunday school, it was presumed our kids would know the answers to all those tough Bible questions. Because your dad is the priest," some kid would say, and probably he was right. Also, the teachers called on our kids more because the pastor's kids could be counted upon when called upon. Plus, they were there every Sunday. It's not that we studied the Bible at home more than any other family. I don't think we did. We had devout families in our churches. Some of them seemed far more capable of maintaining order during a supper time devotional than we were. Over the years, our family would attempt different things, but inevitably, no matter how short and fun I tried to make those devotional times, We dissolved into laughter or tears or maybe yelling. She says later that they were fighting all the way home from a swimming lesson, and when they pulled into their driveway, which was right next to the church, her husband Brent was leading a funeral procession, and she threatens them, saying, "You will not say a word until that coffin enters that church, or there will be big trouble." Their dad was the priest. Their dad led others. He led funerals, and these kids grew up with that faith being so drenched in their lives, even to the point where they lived right next door to the church. Later in the book, she talks about her husband having a job opportunity, and then they found out that it wasn't going to happen. It was a job in New York City, and she struggled with it. She doubted that, God knew what was best. I think we've all been there. She says on page 162, when she was talking to her husband, "Tell me you are disappointed," I wailed to him on the phone. I didn't want him to have it all together so quickly and to immediately be so accepting and so faithful. I wanted him to join me in agony, at least during this phone call. "I am disappointed," he said, "but it's going to be okay. They must have the right person for the job, and it isn't me." He called again later. "Are you still crying?" he asked, amazed. She said, "I had started to believe that I deserved New York City." This happens. There's opportunities in our lives, and then when we get our hopes up, we're often let down. And even sometimes we are able to do those opportunities, and then when we arrive, we're let down. This memoir of faith and doubt is such an intense combination of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, because we pray for the right job. We pray for God to lead us. And then when he does, we're not sure if it's the right way, and we're disappointed when things don't happen exactly the way we thought they would. But all along we keep going because it is that faith that keeps us going. Moving on to friendship and loneliness, Karen opens up pretty much in the first chapter about how the life of a minister's wife can be lonely. She talks throughout the book about how making friendships with other women can be difficult because her husband is the priest. They think they can complain to her about what her husband does or doesn't do. And she has a hard time with that. She wants to connect with these women. She wants to just be a normal person in the congregation. But because her husband is the one up there every Sunday, the spotlight is on him and the spotlight is on her. And that makes friendships difficult. She brings it back to marriage, though, and how it really does come back to her relationship with her husband is more important than friendships. Of course, we all need friendships, but I like the way she talks about marriage. She attributes it to the minister who married them. His name was Doug. He said, "Treat your marriage like a third person, like a child." And then Karen says, "It helps to think of our marriage as someone outside of ourselves who needs a sweater draped over her shoulders when she is cold. She requires us to check in on her, and she needs chocolate and water and champagne and our fiercest protection, and maybe even to be pushed high on a swing occasionally." This is a really beautiful metaphor because in a marriage or in a relationship or even a friendship, it can be so focused on yourself or the other person that you forget that your relationship is its own thing. They're a person, you're a person, but the relationship is unique. And Kevin and I have been married for 14 years. I would like to think that over time we've seen and realized that cultivating a healthy relationship isn't just about what I want or what he wants, but it is about, hey, what are we deciding together about what we both need? And how can we serve each other and serve our marriage? And that takes time and effort. And occasionally I really love being lazy and selfish and saying, you know what? I don't care what he wants. I don't have time to think about what he wants. I don't have time for a date. I just want to do what I want to do. But in order for your relationship to last, you have to take special care, like she says, to check in on it, to check in on the relationship. And this doesn't have to be ooey gooey. Like Kevin would hate if I had like a monthly check-in, like, hey, let's check in on our marriage. It's more of what can we do to make each other laugh? I suggested that we play sequence a few weeks ago, and that was really fun because I beat him. So I enjoyed myself. What has worked for us, and it took me a long time to realize this, is having fun together is probably one of the best things we can do. Yeah, we have work, we have our kids, we have a busy life, we have all of the grinding that you do in a normal adult life. But when Kevin and I have fun together, we laugh, we joke around, that's going to bring us back to our roots, which is friendship. And that's what's held us together all these years anyway. One other thing that Karen is really good at is setting a scene. And at the end of the chapter, she talks about her friendship with a person named Allison. And she kind of compared it to her marriage. They had spent the day at the beach and the lake, and they had an amazing time, and they were kind of playful in the water. Karen says, "We must have looked ridiculous," I said to Brent, then laughed and caught my breath. "You looked like mermaids," he said. "It was beautiful." I believed him, and I don't always believe Brent when he tells me how much I remind him of a mermaid. But I think that with the sun and the water and the vast expanse of the lake and the laughter of old friends, he meant it. On that day, it was nice to be with a friend I'd known for so long, floating together, while Brent sat in a boat with his own friend, his hand grasping a berry bush that grew on a tiny island so our boat would not drift away. Lastly, we're going to look at forgiveness and more. What I love about forgiveness is that it allows for us to make things right. There's such a relief when you make things right. But when things get sticky and messy and angry with friends or other people, especially in church, it's just so awkward to make things right. I appreciate how she talks about how important it is. Karen tells this beautiful story of her and her son, how he had broken a vase, smashed it down in the kitchen, and there was yelling, there was anger, there was tears, and he ran up to his room. She says on page 177, "I knew I had an opportunity to act out forgiveness, to show my son it really is a thing, that it is necessary and happens on purpose as an act of our battered wills." She goes on to invite us into the scene of his room when she woke him up the next morning and she chose to forgive him. He said that he was sorry and that he felt horrible. And he said, "How can you bring me juice after what I did?" And Karen just simply tells him she forgives him and she loves him. I love the simplicity of this is what we do. We forgive each other. It's really hard in the moment, I will admit. I haven't been super great about forgiving people in the moment, but there is that circling back and there is that reprieve of, hey, time has passed. We've cooled down. We have some perspective. Now can we talk about it? Now can we at least just look each other in the face and be tender with each other? Without bringing up all the old wounds, let's forgive each other for the mistakes we both made and let's move on. She also adds the depressing characteristic of forgiveness and how sometimes it is one-sided. You might be in it all by yourself, but that is the grace. That is the grace of depending on God for ultimate satisfaction, is that we really can't depend on other people to forgive us or to ask for forgiveness. She says on page 181, "As forgiveness works out first the grief and then the grace that is among us, we might also need to remember that it is for the good of our own big souls and our own tender hearts." After reading this book, my favorite story was when her daughter and her drove up on a car accident, and they were with a man in his final moments as he passed away, and he was young. With time, Karen and her daughter realized that they could reach out to the family and tell them personally that they were there. And they weren't sure if that was the right move or, if that would be kind of strange or creepy. But the family really appreciated it. And Karen has this way of just taking the smallest acts of being a Christ follower and encouraging the reader to view those acts as holy. And that's a great segue for her next book, because her next book is about holiness, and she is here to talk with me on the next episode, and I can't wait for you to listen. She's a wonderful, wonderful person. In the years since publishing The Minister's Wife, she lost her husband unexpectedly. He was sick for several weeks, and he passed away just a few years ago. So the heartbreaking truth of this book is that she was only a minister's wife for a few more years after publishing this book. I'm so proud to know her. I'm so proud to see the way she's lived her life out graciously amidst the grief, and how she's pressing on, and how beautiful her family is, and how they've come around her and her community has come around her and lifted her up in the time of grief. Thank you for listening to another episode of Book Therapy. Today we talked about The Minister's Wife by Karen Stiller, a memoir of faith, doubt, friendship, loneliness, forgiveness, and more. This is not her only book. She has authored several books. You can find her online at karenstiller.com, and she also writes for free on Substack, so you can read her essays there. I love following her and getting her emails. Like I said, she's witty, and she always makes me laugh and smile, and she always ties things in. She has mastered her craft. She's been doing this for a long time, and I admire her as a writer, as a person, and as a friend. See you next time.